and takes over at the top of the lane. It is Maxfield in front, coming down to the gate pole, and battling on the inside is Visitant. Roadster is third, a furlong to run. Maxfield and Jose Ortiz a 3-length lead. Visitant on the inside is second, then Roadster, Chess Chief, and Sonoman coming to the line. Maxfield is back in the Ali Sheba, and he was strong today.
Welcome back to Racing Rundown. On today's video, we're previewing the Grade 2 Stephen Foster Stakes at Churchill Downs. This race is a win and you're in for the 2021 Breeders' Cup Classic. So if you win this race, you get an automatic entry into the Breeders' Cup Classic. We got a field of 9 horses in here. The talent of this group is all over the place, but it's not a bad race. And as usual, we're going to get into every single one of the horses for this race, and I will give you what I like about them and what I don't like about them going into the race, and ultimately I'll give you my picks depending on what I think is going to happen in this race. So we'll start off with the number 1 horse. That is Chess Chief for trainer Dallas Stewart. This horse is 1 win in this year, and that was a graded stakes win in the New Orleans Classic back in March. His next race was a somewhat decent third-place finish in the Ali Sheba Stakes. It was a decent third, but he was very well beaten by the winner Maxfield on that day, and the horses that he finished in front of were not the greatest. So, Chess Chief is a very interesting horse. He won the New Orleans Classic very narrowly over Owendale, who was kind of beating himself down the stretch in that race. So I'm not really super impressed by the New Orleans Classic. And aside from that, Chess Chief is an allowance horse at best. He's got a couple of allowance wins, but very inconsistent in his career, and I'm very confident that New Orleans Classic win was more on the fluke side than a side of him actually being a really talented horse. Even I wouldn't even go really talented with him. I would say probably he's a very limited, inconsistent horse that I don't really think you're going to see too much of going forward. The number 2 horse is Empty Tomb for trainer Mike Maker. This horse is coming out of an allowance win at Churchill Downs, and his biggest start of the year was in the Kentucky Cup Classic at Turfway. He ran 12th to 13th, so he ran very poorly that day. But aside from that, a very poor effort. This year, and going back to his final start of 2020, has not been bad. A couple seconds in 3 seconds in allowance races this year. Just won for the first time in a very long time in an allowance race at Churchill on May 22nd. So he's been good outside of the Kentucky Cup Classic. So I'm wondering if the Kentucky Cup Classic was just a fact that he didn't take to the surface too well at Turfway Park. But that could also just be a one-off effort for him. But at the end of the day, I think that the best you're going to get from him in here is a long shot that you could potentially consider using underneath. I wouldn't throw out the possibility of him being able to run a decent second or third, a bottom-type wager finish in this race. That's what I would recommend if you want to play this horse. But for a win, I don't see it happening. And, I think you're probably reaching for this horse if you're going to make a wager on him. But if you're one of those people like me, like I like to do sometimes in races, reach for long shots, and if they hit, then you get the nice payout with a good third place wager, then that's something that you could do. But that's as far as I would go with Empty Tomb. Number 3 is Necker Island, a horse who you may remember from the 2020 Kentucky Derby Trail. He ran 9th in the Kentucky Derby, and since then has come back to have a couple of solid efforts in allowance company. He was second off the layoff from that Kentucky Derby in an Oaklawn Park allowance, and then he won at Churchill Downs, which he has some good success at Churchill Downs. Couple of wins when he was a 2-year-old. He broke his maiden at Churchill Downs, and then won an allowance there as well. So 2 wins in 2019. Now we'll win this year, and you go back to some of his other efforts. He was 5th in the Matt win. That wasn't a terrible effort, and then he was also 4th in an allowance. So clearly does do better when he's running at Churchill Downs, and he's not a bad horse. I would say that you go back and you look at his stakes efforts. The one races that would be that would be turnoffs for me would be the Swale and the Gotham, but those were going 1 turn, and I'm not really sure that 1 turn is exactly what he wants to do. Had a couple of good placing efforts in Kentucky Derby prep races last year, the Indiana and the Ellis Park Derby, so he's a decent horse, but I think he's very limited, and I'm not sure that he's a win contender here. But, he does do well at Churchill Downs for the most part. So, again, I would say he's probably a show wager horse for you. He did have some good third-place finishes in stakes last year, and his 9th wasn't the worst race in the Kentucky Derby. I'll put it this way. I thought he was going to run a lot worse than he did in the Kentucky Derby, and running 9th, he beat several horses who I thought were going to run better than him in that race. So disappointing, yes, in the Kentucky Derby, but it wasn't terrible. And, he's got a decent shot to run okay in this race. And now we're moving on to the number 4 horse in this race, and that's Sprawl. Sprawl has been a horse who's been very inconsistent throughout his career. He's got some wins, but he's also got some really bad efforts in stakes races. He was 9th in the Ellis Park Derby last year, 5th in the Ohio Derby. However, I would say he seems to be in better form this year. He got a break from the Ellis Park Derby, didn't run again for the rest of the year. Came back off the layoff and ran 3rd in an allowance at Churchill, where he was beaten a length and 3/4 in that effort. Then came back and ran a okay 4th place finish in the Ben Ally Stakes at Keeneland. Now, you would look at that 4th of 5 horses and say, was it really that good? But he was beaten a half length by the winner, then a neck by the 2nd place horse, and a nose by the 3rd place horse. So he really only lost that race by less than a length. So it certainly wasn't a bad effort for Sprawl. And I wouldn't even say that the winner of that race, Silver Dust, is the greatest horse. Then he came back, won an allowance at Churchill, got his first win since another Churchill allowance. So again, we're dealing with another horse that usually tends to run some, as of late, has been running some decent races at Churchill. Couple allowance victories for him. Didn't do too well in the earlier part of his career, but seems to have taken a liking to Churchill as of late. Then he ran a good 3rd in the Blame Stakes at Churchill. Again, a race where he was 3rd in a short field, but he was beaten a nose and a head for 1st and 2nd, and that was a race that looked like he was going to steal it for the majority of the stretch. He just narrowly got edged out in there by Canadian horse Mighty Heart, who won 2 legs of the Canadian Triple Crown, and then Night Ops, who was a fairly solid horse on this continent in some of these Midwestern stakes races. So Sprawl is a horse that, depending on where the price is, you could make a case for him underneath in here. I certainly wouldn't write him off, but there's other horses in here that I prefer that have more consistency than Sprawl does. And one of those horses is the horse we're going to move on to now, the number 5 horse, Silver Dust. Silver Dust, you might not think that this horse, 37 career starts and only 7 wins with 7 seconds and 5/3. You might not say, okay, well, that horse doesn't seem like he's the most consistent, but in recent years, this horse has been very, very good in stakes company, at least, or relatively speaking, comparing him to the races that he's running in. He won the Ben Ally Stakes at Keeneland, which was his 2nd start of the year. He didn't run good at all off the layoff in an allowance race at the Fairgrounds, but definitely needed that race. Came back and ran good in the Ben Ally Stakes. He won that by a half a length. I already talked about that, but the very important thing with this horse is he loves Churchill Downs, and that's why I really like him in here. I'm not picking him on top in here, but he has not finished off the board in a race at Churchill Downs going back to May 24th of 2018. So this is a horse, and a lot of those runs have come in stakes races. He was in 3 stakes races at Churchill Downs last year. Stephen Foster, Blame, and Ali Sheba. Those are not in order, but he was in all 3 of those races. He ran 3rd in all of them. Going back to 2019, he was 2nd in the Lucas Classic, and he was 4th in the Ali Sheba Stakes. I will clarify myself. If I did say in the money, I meant to say on the board. He has not finished off the board in a race at Churchill Downs going back to May of 2018. So if I did slip that up, I do apologize. It was off the board, but the point being with this horse, he really likes Churchill Downs. I think you might be able to get a somewhat decent price with him. I don't think he's going to be a big overlay because he is coming out of a stakes win. But I do think that there is a possibility that Chess Chief is going to take more money. And at the end of the day, Maxfield is getting hammered regardless, so he may still end up being a good price. And, in a race where the favorite is going to be very, very well bet, that you might just want to go for a horse that may be 5 or 6 to 1 when they go off. The next horse we're going to move on to is Warrior's Charge, a horse who had promise for a very long time in his career, especially going to the early part of his 4-year-old campaign. He had a very good start to prominence as a 3-year-old, a very impressive allowance victory at Oaklawn Park after breaking his maiden also at Oaklawn, and didn't run bad in the Preakness either. And then an allowance win at the Fairgrounds at the end of 2019, won the Razorback, and then was 2nd in the Oaklawn Handicap. But has disappointed ever since then. He was 4th in the Met Mile. That wasn't a terrible race, but then he was put up in the Phillip Island last year in a very, very poor disqualification. And I'm saying that, and I had him in the race. So if I'm saying a disqualification is poor and I had the winner, that got put up because of it, then it was a really bad disqualification. And then the ACAC Stakes at Churchill Downs in September, really a step back for him. And at 5, he has just not been good. Second in an allowance, that was off the layoff, and then 2 very poor finishes. He was 5th in the Oaklawn Handicap and 6th in the Steve Sexton Mile at Lone Star. Maybe he didn't like the surface, but still, he has been trending down in his career ever since that second in the Oaklawn Handicap, and I am going to be very against him in here because he is just trending down ever since then. I think that his best races are behind him. South Bend is the next horse we're going to move on to. He's another horse that you may remember from the 2020 Kentucky Derby Trail. He ran in a couple of Derby prep races. He was 2nd in the Ohio Derby and then 4th in the Travers. And then he ran a very, very disappointing 15th place finish in the Kentucky Derby. That was good enough for last place in last year's Kentucky Derby. And he really has not improved much since then. He got on the grass for the Belmont Derby, so you could maybe forgive him for that a little bit, but aside from that, he won his first start back, but that was against Allowance Company, and it really wasn't the greatest allowance field. I know that some horses have come back to do some things from that race. Specifically, Mighty Heart, who won the Blame Stakes, actually beat South Bend in that Blame Stakes, but the very disappointing 5th place finish in the Blame Stakes is really why I'm off of South Bend in here. He could revert back to his on the board finishes in Kentucky Derby prep races from last year, but I really don't see it coming, and I'm going to be against South Bend in this race. And now we're going to move on to the number 8 horse in here, the very who I presume to be the very heavy favorite in this race. That's Maxfield. Maxfield has been a horse that a lot of people have been really high on for a very long time. I used to be one of those people, but I have been down on Maxfield since he lost the Santa Anita Handicap. But the reality with Maxfield is he's very good when he runs against these kind of horses. He's got 3 stakes wins this year, all in races very similar to this. Or I should say 3 stakes races since his second injury after the Matt Winn Stakes. The Tenacious December of 2019. That was against a very average at best field. The Mineshaft, same thing. Very, very average field. And then the Ali Sheba, also very average. He went out to California for the Santa Anita Handicap. That was his one loss of his career. Didn't like going a mile and a quarter. That's probably not going to be his game. But at the end of the day, he was still bested by Idol, who is a good horse, but Express Train was a horse who was really disappointed since that Santa Anita Handicap. So I really don't think Maxfield is as good as we thought he was toward the end of his 2-year-old campaign and the early part of his 3-year-old campaign, but that is still good enough to beat this field, because this is not a very good field in front of him, and all you have to do is just look at what he beat in the Tenacious Stakes, in the Mineshaft, and in the Ali Sheba. He beat relatively the same horses he's going up against here. He's got Visitant and Chess Chief, who were in this race, or who were in the Ali Sheba and are also in this race. You go and take a look at Sonoman, a horse who was 5th in that Ali Sheba Stakes. He very, very disappointed this past weekend in a race at Churchill Downs. So I really see no reason Maxfield doesn't get the job done in this race. He's won at Churchill before. We know he likes Churchill, so that's definitely a good thing for him. And at the end of the day, there's no one in here that I think has a good enough shot to beat him. And then the final horse that we're going to move on to is the number 9 Visitant, the winner of the Kentucky Cup Classic earlier this year at Turfway. And this horse has actually been very solid, especially as of late. Obviously, the Kentucky Cup Classic win, but he was also an allowance winner before at Turfway. And then, the second place finish in the Ali Sheba Stakes, showing that he could handle the dirt. He did also run in the Affirm Stakes at Santa Anita way back in 2019. That was obviously a race where he was beaten by Mucho Gusto and Roadster, both horses who, I don't really know how good they are, but it shows that he can handle the dirt and run respectable. That was a respectable 3rd place finish in that race behind a horse who would go on to be a Pegasus World Cup winner. And I know that field that he ran against was not that good, but still a horse who came back to be a Grade 1 winner and a horse who was a Grade 1 winner. So the horses that beat him in the Affirm Stakes were not terrible, and it shows you that he can at least handle the dirt. And, I know he had a very poor 7th place finish in a Keeneland allowance, but I got 2 good races on the dirt and 1 race on the dirt. Or actually, you really can't sugarcoat that. That was a bad race, but he's been good for the most part. So I will say he is probably going to replicate that run that he had in the Ali Shiba. I really don't see anyone in here that I'm confident enough that's better than this top two. So I'm going to run the same top two back from the Ali Shiba, the Maxfield Visitant Exacta, and then the horse that I'm going to stick in at the bottom of that triple is Silver Dust. I'm going to hope the value is a little bit good on Silver Dust. I know Maxfield's going to get hammered. I know it's chalky, but this is not a race that I think you can... I mean, you can certainly play horses underneath in here because there are some horses that you can make good cases for, but I'm personally not going to make that because I feel like I'm reaching if I'm making cases for some of the longer shot horses in this race. So that's about it for this race. Again, I do apologize that all the previews that I'm going to end up doing this weekend are very chalky. It's just the way the races came up. I can't really help that. But we'll have more previews upcoming in the next couple of weeks that should be races that are a lot more wide open, a lot more deep. So we'll get to those in the next couple of weeks, and we do appreciate you stopping by. If you haven't subscribed already, be sure to subscribe and also check out our other previews that we will have this week for the Breeders' Cup prep. So we'll see you next time. Have a good one, and if you do play this race, good luck.
And Treasure Trove is a wide fifth as they turn for home. Silver Dust with a narrow lead. Bo Luminari outside, Sprawl to the inside. And then Night Ops and Treasure Trove far outside. These five line up across the track in the final furlong. Sprawl is running a game race down to the rail. Bo Luminari is there. Silver Dust is there. Silver Dust ahead in front once again. Bo Luminari, Night Ops is running late on the outside. Silver Dust in front at the line. Silver Dust wins it by a